In a bid to add some momentum to the channel's growth, I've developed a new intro to try and appeal to a wider YouTube audience.
Echo Chamberlain, Echo Chamberlain, Echo Chamberlain.
Nope, I can't do it. For better or worse, you're stuck with the curmudgeonly commentary of an articulately erudite Antipodean asshole. Take a look through the top 20 films of last year, and one thing you'll notice is a strange modern puritanism, a very jarring prudishness, that would seem to be completely out of step with the seediness, vulgarity, and general neurotic sex obsessiveness of the modern age. There's nary a sex scene, flash of skin, tantalizing hint of tits and ass, eroticism, or characters getting it on in conventional sex scenes. For the top 20 films in a year to contain not a single steamy shower scene is something audiences from yesteryear would have thought disgraceful, unacceptable, and might have led to some form of public demonstrations, skirmishes with riot police, the issue being raised in parliamentary question time, and major figures being hauled before congressional committees to account for the phenomenon. At the same time, there has been a plethora in the last few years of gay-centered dramas that have performed well critically and commercially, such as Love, Simon, Young Royals, and Heartstopper. All of these shows have been identity and sex positive, and delved sensitively and maturely enough into the difficult territory of adolescent self-discovery. But the purpose of my video isn't specifically queer-led stories. It's the placement and contextualization of queer identity within mainstream shows. And it's here that there's a new dynamic with a recurring pattern in which gay romances, fledgling or established, are invariably presented as compassionate and rich bright spots in otherwise sexless, sexually dysfunctional worlds, and oftentimes ones where sexuality, relationships, or marriage is transactional, defined by political and alliance-based considerations and status, or are based on plain old incest. This pattern, this dynamic, ranges from zany cartoon worlds to the grimmest and bleakest medieval realms. Anyone who was born foolish, and who by now has beseeched the world to swallow them up after enduring the identity politics-riven, self-indulgent, spiritless, hostile to the senses, vacuous trash of Velma, will be aware that the world of heterosexuality and sexuality in general is made up either of narcissistic or single adults, students with subpar sexual anatomy, in the case of Fred, and an atmosphere of judgment, except for the harmoniously positive and solid lesbian cop relationship and the burgeoning emotional rapture and release of self-discovery of the lesbian kiss between Velma and Daphne. In House of the Dragon, the heterosexual world is a capricious and dangerous one, where marriages are arranged, often sexless, the wives often maneuvered around like pawns, marriages usually to do with hierarchies and alliances, and become loveless over time, with perhaps the most emotionally rich and nuanced one being between an incestuous uncle and niece. Except for the emotionally and sensitive and compassionate bond between two blokes, a relationship given a decent amount of screen time to be explored and embellished, and which is defined perhaps most of all by its inadmissible nature in a callous, larger world. Lightyear is a virtually sexless kids' film in which the overall world scarcely has any context, mention, or leaning towards heterosexual romance, relationships, or bonds, except for the lesbian relationship with Lightyear's superior officer, Alicia, and her wife, with several sequences showing and emphasizing the enduring, cloudless, impeccably positive nature of their relationship. In Andor, the heterosexual world is oddly muted, even by Star Wars standards, with relationships abstractly hinted at or glossed over, often defined by betrayal, a central character with a loveless arranged marriage, who then, for political purposes, is willing to sacrifice the independence of her own daughter in a similar arranged marriage. A vast array of entirely single people on both sides of the divide, and barely a kiss, caress, gesture, or lingering look amongst anyone, except for the troubled but still elaborated on and explored relationship and sexual tensions between two lesbian characters, one of whom is willing to set aside her romantic leanings for the good of a bigger cause. It is, in effect, the closest thing to a recognizably strong romantic and sexual connection in the whole show. In Willow, the heterosexual world is a frivolous and silly one, full of frivolous and silly interactions, pathetic attempts at courtly drama, and comedic or ancillary characters skirting around the idea of romance. Except, in this ostensible kid show, there is an expression of functional, promising, tender affection and romantic possibility involving two young girls, and a kiss depicted with enlivening wonderment and positivity. In Strange World, it is again one in which sexuality is almost completely dormant, or irrelevant in the heterosexual sense, with singletons of all ages, no particular strong hetero bonds or attraction on any level between any characters, or any sustained sense of the idea of sexuality or relationships at all. Except for the romantic crush between the lead character and another boy, a crush explored in a sensitive, endearing, and satirical way of relatable blunders, self-recrimination for saying the wrong thing, and all couched in terms of positivity, with every other major and ancillary character ostensibly heterosexual, blithely and warmly encouraging the little tendresse between the two boys. In The Haunting of Bly Manor, a Henry James-based ghost story, virtually all the characters are washed-up, anxious heteros with no romantic or sexual prospects, partly because they are either ghosts, or simply because the story has no particular leanings or inclination towards expanding their identities in that direction. Or they might have had a sexual and romantic past, but the two characters in this category are wayward, neglectful, and self-absorbed, and come to a dark end. The world of the story, therefore, is largely asexual and aromantic, except for the lead character who gradually falls for another woman, with this relationship earning its own 2 to 3 episode arc towards the end of the series, explored in nuance and detail, with aching sensitivity and simple human realism, in a way that departs entirely from the mood and tone of the rest of the series. Now, let's be clear, nothing wrong with LGBT content. In fact, as an author, my first novel had some elaborate queer themes, and I've learnt the subtleties of my craft from studying the cadences and textures of many a gay writer. The issue was one of contextualization, the inversion that regularly occurs nowadays, with positive gay relationships cropping up in shows irrespective of genre or audience, in worlds where the corresponding hetero world is often oddly diminished, compromised, or opaque. If you're going to have one, why not have the other? I, for one, am crying out for a bit more good old-fashioned hetero smut. To that end, after completing this singularly themed video, I'm going to download a couple of classic Halle Berry flicks and beat myself like I owe myself money. I mean, I could never be accused of doing anything that could be thought of as camp.
Echo Chamberlain, Echo Chamberlain, Echo Chamberlain.